everyone, this is Hardee, and this is my husband, Steve. And we've decided to start our own YouTube podcast regarding Star Trek. And we would like to start with the original series. And I believe that it was created in 1966, but not published until 1986. And we're watching the Paramount Plus version, the remastered version, as opposed to the original. And Steve, you know more about that, don't you?
Yeah, so the first episode, if you look in the episode order on Paramount Plus or indeed on Wikipedia, it's called The Cage and it is the original pilot. It's uh it was commissioned by NBC or authorized by NBC. Gene Roddenberry went to them and he got, I think it was $500,000 to make a pilot. And this is the pilot he produced with pretty much none um, of the characters that we know and love from the original series, except for Spock. Except Spock was had different characterization, and NBC didn't like it, but they gave him money to make another one, which is interesting, and we can kind of um, talk more about that as we get started. But this is the first pilot, and then it got later um, finally aired in 1986, 20 years after um, Star Trek went on the air for the first time in 1966. So I'm a little bit miffed at the 2009 remaster that is available on Paramount Plus. Um, the external scenes of the Enterprise are CG, and it's okay CG, but you can tell. And for myself, I would rather see the original effects. And what irks me is on Paramount Plus, that is not an option. If you go on Amazon and get Paramount Plus on Amazon, there is a way to watch the original series with original effects. Um, and then I understand that they're a special option if you get the Blu-ray of the original series. So we might do that going forward, but for now we're watching on Paramount Plus, and the replacement effects are okay.
Thank you, Steve. And we were thinking how we would structure it would be I would have 5 questions, and Steve would have 5 questions about the show that we both watched independently, taking our own notes and recording them, and then having this exchange of ideas around the episode. Um, Steve, did you want to take the first one of yours?
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk about what happens in the middle of the episode with the fantasy illusion powers of these aliens. So our Captain Pike is caged. It's called the cage because he's imprisoned um, by these aliens who have a human menagerie zoo, and they want him to mate with their other human captive, Vina. And so they put him through these illusory um, places. One is at the uh, castle that he just escaped from in the implied backstory. It's like a fantasy castle with uh, with this barbarian warrior sword guy, and we get to see Captain Pike have a melee fight over Vina, but it's all illusion. And what I think is so cool about that is that it's showing that even at the very beginning of Star Trek, there's this genre hopping that they're going to go visit different genres. In this case, it was fantasy, and then in the same episode, we have a little bit of we there's some other scenes um, that he goes to with Vina to try and be idyllic. But this sort of the main one is fantasy genre, and then later in the original series, there's the Planet of the Week can sometimes be um, different scenes or genres, and then later it's the holodeck. But that idea of we're going to genre hop, I just think is so neat.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and Vina actually is quoted as saying, when dreams become more important than reality, you give up travel, building, creating, you even forget how to repair the machines left behind by your ancestors. You just sit living and reliving other lives left behind in the thought records. And what I find interesting is that it's actually a negative um, criticism on fantasy. And it's actually directed towards the captors, the Telosians, or the aliens that inhabit the Talos group. And they end up being uh, the foil to Captain Pike, because Captain Pike originally was on the USS Enterprise, um, just having survived an incident which was giving him post traumatic stress. And he was talking to Dr. Boyce, his friend, as well as Doctor, about how he felt the heaviness of being responsible for 203 lives, and him just wanting to go back to his ranch and feed his horses and have a simple life. And and so that's the negative part of the fantasies, where you know the Telosians, uh, they got caught in their own fantasies so much so that they lost their ability to repair the machines. So they can't do anything on this planet, and that's why they need to capture the humans and feed off their living fantasies, their life force, um, and um, and so it's interesting because I think that overall the story is positive. I mean, the story for its time, it was groundbreaking. Here you are thinking outside of the planet Earth, and you're thinking that there's life forms out there. I mean, this is just one idea of what might be out there. But you've got these other life forms with their own individual struggles, and and um, and the choices that they have made, and how it impacts, and how similar they are to humans as well. Because um, you know that's what the struggle was with uh, Captain Pike. Now, he was a prime specimen, as they said. They wanted to capture him. And yet, he was actually a very good representation of um, the model captain, who is a bit divorced uh, from fantasy as well as reality. I mean, in a way, I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying, Steve?
Yeah, it's that they presented repeated challenges to the captain's confidence. You know, we start out at the beginning with this private scene with the doctor where he says, I can't take it anymore. I want to go be an Orion trader." And then later, you know, he's presented with Vina, and he's like, "No, I'm not attracted. I can't show attraction to her. I'm professional." And he has he has to show putting on a serious face for the crew about, at first they're not going to go to the planet, and then he has to reverse when there's evidence, even though they're saying, you know, we should. Um, there's the constant be the captain, be inhuman, but he's constantly being forced to be human. And we see him deal with that tension.
And he's very good about it. I mean, the the crew itself, he has a number one who is a woman, which is a very uh, huge thing in the 1960s, especially if you're thinking about military command. There's a yeoman who's also a woman, and they are all working together, and that dynamic is interesting as we see how how the captain navigates those relationships, and plays it plays into the the Telosians' hands in a way, because then the Telosians are aware, because they are mind readers, that they have other women that he can procreate with besides the woman Vina, who was a survivor. We find out from the past ship SS Columbia, and so then he is presented while he is in captivity with the choices of procreating with any one of those
Yeah.
individuals.
And of course it's after he resists Vina. He said, "You're not real." And when they sort of prove actually she is real, she's um, another human here that's in this place. And the Telesians are, well, you don't like her? How about these other two that we just grabbed off your ship? And it leads to this hilarious moment where the mind reading Telosian just starts saying, "Oh well, you know, um, she always thought you're out of reach, but now you're not." And that was the yeoman. And then number one, well, oh, she privately fantasizes about you. And so we get this. It's funny, but it's also that's how alien the aliens are. They're like, why can't I just say what's on your mind? I read it. It's true. Um, even though we humans, we don't want our thoughts broadcast.
Although I do find it interesting that they did not broadcast Captain Pike's thoughts
Yes. Yeah,
on
he was spared having
on
his private feelings
on any
revealed.
of these potential um,
Very good
life
point.
mates. Um, and uh, and another interesting thing is that the actress who played number one, her name was,
Majel Barrett.
and she uh, was married to Gene
Yeah, she
Roddenberry
married Gene
later
Roddenberry a
on.
few years later.
Hmm.
I believe she was a nurse in the rest of the original series, and then she came back in the next generation as Luoxana Troy, Counselor Troy's mother, which um, that's a powerful role. I kind of cringe at those episodes, but it's still it's because of the power. And I think we read she gained the honorific First Lady of Star Trek.
Well deserved. I really liked her character.
Yeah, she did a bang up job. Like she really owned this episode.
Which comes to my first question, which is, of the characters in the show, who would you have wanted uh, if you were the captain? And then in reverse, if I were number one, who would I have thought would be the perfect mate for me? So you can take that one first if you want.
Oh, um,
I threw you a curveball.
yeah, I don't know. I guess from Captain Pike's perspective, it, but also right, like we're omniscient. We've seen the episode. We know the truth about what's going on there and what the Telosians had in store. And um, honestly, if I were the captain, I would have felt safest with the yeoman. Um, I would have sort of known where I stood. Um, especially if I still harbored any hope of ever getting out.
Okay, so if I were number one, I would probably pick. Um, I think I would have liked Spock, and Spock was in this episode.
Yes.
He was just brief, but just his command, because he was the third in command. Once the I was going to say president for some reason. Once the captain was gone and
Yep.
number one was missing, he was in complete control of the ship, knew exactly what to do, and just had that demeanor about him that you know was
Yeah,
was the beginning of the logical thing because
yeah, it's the beginning, right? It's
mhm,
the command is there, the self control is there, but there's no mention of the emotion suppression, the living by logic, the stilted behavior of
well,
Vulcans, but the look is there.
no, but in comparison to Doctor Boyce, who Captain Pike called a dirty old man, I appreciate the level-headedness of his character, even though there was more
Yeah,
emotion in his delivery than you would expect from Spock. I think that this was the beginnings of a, I am going to use my logic, and I'm not going to be um, swayed by desire and by anything base or that um, or any of those emotions, which I appreciate. Um,
yeah.
so then, what was your second question?
So, I wanted to raise how at the end, and of course, right, spoilers, this is 60-year-old TV, so I'm just going to talk about it. If viewers want to go watch the episode, go watch the episode. The end where it's revealed that the Telosians are just going to let Pike and his crew go. And Vina decides to stay, but she could have gone if she'd wanted to. But when the Telosians agree to let them go, it's sort of just oh sorry, and it's this 180-degree whiplash in their character, right? They were these cruel experimenters, like they're cold and heartless about the wants and needs of their um, residents. But they of course think they're being benevolent, like, oh, we'll give you, you can have whatever you want. It can feel like whatever you want it to feel. Why isn't that good enough? And it's not good enough for Pike and the other Enterprise crew. Um, but the 180 struck me as really shocking when he says, "Oh, I didn't realize. We downloaded your database. We know all about human history now, and we realized that you weren't going to thrive in our captivity, and you seemed like the most suitable species to rebuild our civilization for us as a slave class, but yeah, it turns out that's not going to work because of your predilection to resist captivity. So yeah, you just go, yeah, no harm, no foul, sorry. Um and then Pike and number one accept that, right? There's no wrangling over, we need to get you back, or there needs to be justice over what you've done. They're just okay,
I
we'll go
think
now.
I think because these Telosians seem to have enormous amounts of power in the beginning, almost this um, magical quality where they couldn't be defeated. And um, but as we know in the world of Star Trek, I mean, eventually, some part of that illusion will start to crack. And that was when the alien stuck his hand into the cage to pick up some phasers. And that was the opportunity for the captain to grab him and then threaten his life in order for him to realize that humans are not going to take captivity very well. But an interesting part of this is punishment. And um, okay, so just to build on that, my second question: what punishment would you have liked to have seen given to the Telosians?
I don't know, right? It's not clear that there's a remedy um, for what they do, right? I mean, there's some, right? Vina at one point. So the showdown is when Pike's overloading his phaser, and so is number one, and they're like, well, we're just going to vaporize ourselves so that you can't have us. We'd rather die than live the way you want us to. And Venus says, if I don't stand next to you, if I run away from the explosion and go underground, then they'll just try and capture more humans. And so that suggests that if I were Starfleet, I would want something more than their word that they're not going to capture people again.
But
Um,
if you recall, they said that they have no means to survive beyond their
yeah,
lifetime. So
yeah,
they're
right,
going to die, and then they don't have any way to regenerate, and then
exactly.
they will just
That
die.
that's part of the crazy question. The Telosian just says, yeah, without your species as servants, we're just going to everything around us is going to slowly fail, and we're just going to go extinct,
I think
and there's
that's
nothing we can do
pretty
about it.
dark and stark punishment for them.
But you'd think that they would start to act desperately rather than just accept that they're going to fade away.
I did read somewhere that a few more episodes in the Star Trek life goes back to this planet because they haven't died off. So there are some episodes that again deal with the Telosians because they didn't die. So maybe that's why
Oh,
it was left open ended so that they could
yeah,
revisit this question with them.
yeah. Maybe we'll get there. I'm excited to see what the um um what other episodes have in store.
There are about 10 more minutes because this
Yeah, we want to wrap it up.
podcast. Um, did you want to ask your questions?
Yeah. I have um I wanted to go to the interlude scene um where Captain Pike is treated to a vision of being an Orion trader, like he says to the doctor at the beginning. He says, I want to go be an Orion trader and trade in green slave girls. And we get to see a green slave girl, and
No, it
it's
says green slave animal.
right,
Um,
green slave animal. Yeah,
so I think Vina was just playing the part of that,
yeah.
but
Vina was playing the part.
when it was first introduced as an animal, I didn't picture a human actually. So when
Yeah.
Vina was dancing there in green paint,
Hmm.
I think that then I was like, oh, maybe this is something that is not aging well, and they are referring to the American slave trade in passing, which is just a can of worms. So,
Yeah.
I
Could
kind
be.
yeah. So
But
I
that's not what
was
I mean. That's they went in a different direction, right? That became the basis for the Orion species and Orion pirates, and there's still episodes about that.
later
You know,
on in the
Tendi
series.
on Lower Decks right now is an Orion member of that species, and they go to the Orion homeworld, and we get to see some of their culture and some of the complexity. But yeah, it was a little bit brutal and base, but it was right there from the beginning, which is kind of neat.
My question was, uh, did the stage sets and props take you out of the um, Star Trek world?
Yeah, for me, no, right? I like looking at
For
them.
me, yes. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
there
it's
was
not
this
that I can't tell, right?
fake blue plant that was just on wires, and it was just like hanging, and then
Yeah,
you could see that was clearly these floor to ceiling paint.
paintings.
It was beautiful. I mean,
Yeah,
I like them. I
they're
mean,
nice paintings,
you would see
and
them on a stage set if you were going to see a play or a musical, an
yeah,
expensive set, but
yeah.
a set piece nevertheless. And
I mean, the blue leaf plant that's pretty bad. That's the most challenging thing for me in the episode, as far as the original effects, right? It's clearly some blue, um, uh, crepe paper membrane type material attached to wires, and yeah, but just this side of immersion breaking for me.
it again, it was the time, and nowadays, well, you have to sort of see it in its time frame because if you compare it to the visuals that we have, like in Marvel Universe movies or Harry Potter or all those very CGI and
Yeah,
expensive
we're
uh,
used to seeing all kinds of
production value, then
fantastical things with the
it
magic of
you
computer
might not
graphics.
be thrilled.
Hmm.
However, I think the story itself is strong enough. It appealed to me. because I like to read books, and I think the script is written in a way that is easy to understand and deals with those fundamental questions that every human can recognize in themselves. You know, the responsibilities of you know, yourself, your crew, um, you know, your relationship with others. You know, what fuels you, what will heal you in times of trouble or pain. Um, because they do mention that they lost lives on Rigel 7. And the captain is not over that. In fact, he wants to retire. And he wants to be the Orion trader. He wants to escape. Um, and in some ways, back to your question on fantasy, fantasy does that. It does offer an escape. But the dangers of the escape is something like what would happen on Talos, is because you know, you if you're so enmeshed in fantasy, like I remember the story of that when this one video game was so popular, people wouldn't get out to use the washroom and would just constantly play this game for days on end, 24/7, without eating, and eventually died just because they could not leave their screens. And I think that was an issue that they were trying to address in some way, even though they didn't have video games to the extent that we have now,
Hmm.
about about you know, not being able to actually use the ancestral machinery. And honestly, Steve, you don't have this problem. You still can operate machinery. But if you think, I was very into book learning, book thinking, book smart thing kind of, and I am not very useful practically. I cannot. I'm not machine knowledgeable, and I think
I worry that our culture is too much that way, right? Like
yes,
it's a culture of everyone stay safe, don't touch it if you don't understand it, leave it
yeah,
to the professionals,
right.
where the professionals get ever more scarce and expensive for their time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just end up not touching things until they decay.
And what if the people with the knowledge are the ones that go first, like in this
Hmm.
case? Then you
Yeah.
have no connection to the technology anymore. Oh, that
Yeah.
is so scary.
But
Uh,
but sort of sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was gonna no continue your thought because I thought you can go to your fourth one
Yeah.
and then we
I
can.
just I just want to come back. Like this was all about the writing, and I just love how this is a really well put together script. It's got references forward and back. There's foreshadowing. There's layering of themes. They spent time on the writing, and I appreciate it, and I noticed it. And there's too little of that in TV today. Um, but my last point is I want to raise that this episode is reconstructed. So the original color footage, it was mastered on film, and it got made into the two-part episode, The Menagerie, that aired as part of um, actual Star Trek that was shown on TV. And that involved cutting the masters. And they lost the offcuts. But Gene Roddenberry had a black and white film cut that he would show to his friends and at conventions and stuff. And the offcuts were lost until the early 80s, and somebody in a Hollywood Film Lab just found them in a box and gave them back to Paramount. And so that led to, in 1986, a broadcast of The Cage in color based on a reconstructed film from the off clippings, the masters of the menagerie, and the soundtracks from Gene Roddenberry's own copy. And so for 20 years, no one saw this episode in color, even though it was filmed in color,
Mhm.
um, which makes it art that was lost and found again. Um, you know, Gilgamesh is like that, Beowulf is like that. Contrast to Homer or the Bible, which have never been lost since they were written down. And it's kind of neat to take something so recent and bucketize it in that way.
Sure. So my final question is, how many stars would you give this first episode?
I'm going to take on a 4-star scale, and I'm going to take 4 stars is the best that Star Trek can be. I'm not going to compare it to me other media that I maybe like more or found more exciting or personally meaningful or anything like that. I'm going to say 4 stars means as good as anything in the Star Trek, 6 decades of content. And I give it a 4 stars. This is really solid. It's a great episode, and I think if you're going to only watch one Star Trek episode in your life, you would do worse than watching this one.
I agree. I give it 4 stars, and I look forward to catching the next episode, which I think is called The Man Trap.
All right,
Do you have
Hardee and Steve.
a last question, or are we good?
No, I think that's great. We're gonna watch the Man Trap, and we'll be on again.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining in.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.